Hi, everyone that's been able to join us this afternoon for the August edition of Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise. My name is Jessica Bergen, and I'm at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, and I'm here today representing the Trico Foundation Social Entrepreneurship Center, and I'm honored to be hosting this session. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Calgary is situated on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Good Stoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I'm actually on holidays this week, so I'm coming to you today from the heart of Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. If you're joining us from outside of Calgary today and want to acknowledge the traditional territories where you are, please feel free to share in the chat. For those of you, and I see some familiar names, for those of you who have tuned in to an Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise session before, welcome back. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. This is truly an Ask Me Anything style event. We've got no formal agenda beyond offering answers to your questions about social entrepreneurship and sharing other resources you might consider and what the organizations of our different panel representatives are up to. So that said, we really rely on audience questions to drive the session's content. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat now, and then we'll get started after we introduce our panel. We're a small group today, so we can keep things pretty informal. You could also just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you so choose to ask your question to the panel. There's no silly questions, so don't be worried, especially given our nice small group today. And just an FYI for everyone that we are recording the session. And then once we have an opportunity to kind of download the recording, take some notes on kind of what was discussed in the meeting, what resources were shared, we'll post that to our YouTube channel. And I believe we've uploaded July's session there. So once we get started, I'll drop the link in the chat for anyone that would like to check it out. And without further ado, I would like to introduce today's panel. We've got Brittany joining us from the Trico Charitable Foundation, Dan from the Trico Charitable Foundation as well. We've got Philip from Momentum and Meredith from Innovate Calgary. Thanks everyone for joining us. Does anyone have a question or a thought or a comment to kick us off today?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate McKenzie. Nice to see some familiar faces and to also see some new faces. And I'm joining also from Calgary. Jessica, thanks for kicking us off with that land acknowledgement. It's awesome. So I guess my question kind of comes more from a space of, I'm curious to hear, what are some of the best ways that you're seeing of folks measuring the social impact side? So just for some context, I am in the process of taking an organization to becoming a not-for-profit. And we're looking at, we've kind of operated under a social enterprise values and lens. And so now I think we're looking to kind of start measuring the impact that we're having. And I'm curious to hear, what are some of the ways that you're seeing that are most effective, that folks are measuring that impact and being able to report on that impact as well in a really transparent way.
That's a great question, Kate. Thank you and welcome. Did anyone have some thoughts for Kate? Brittany?
No, I don't have much to add.
No, okay.
Now, but so like I would just say, like, one of the things it's hard with measurement because it really depends on like what your organization is looking at and what your goals are. So that was kind of something I would work with organizations around first, is kind of figuring out what are their goals, both financially and, so I'm talking social entrepreneurship, so financially, but then also on the social side. So what type of impact or what type of change they're looking to see, and then figuring out the best tool to measure that. And then sometimes there are other things to consider. So for example, if you were looking for a certain type of funding or working with a different type of funder, whether it's government or a foundation or something like that, you might also want to think about what sort of they look at impact, right? And how they measure impact. Because sometimes you have to kind of like think outside of the box, right? Or sometimes the other thing is that if you are working with like a funder, they might only be looking at one aspect of the impact that you're having. You might be having all these other aspects as well. So like for me, when I would work with an organization, I'd probably sort of talk to them about, okay, well, what are the goals and what are the impacts that you want to see? What are the measurable things within that are kind of showing change over time? But then I would also probably get them to think about, if they're bringing this to someone, and even if it's their audience, right? Like whether it's just reporting on their impact, who the audience is, what they're kind of looking for, what kind of language they speak as well for that impact. And then, like I said, is even with like funders, right? Is thinking through, are there different ways that we need to talk about this with different audiences that would make sense for us? But it's more of just like a general thing. But I think it really depends on like what type of impact you're having, right? Because oftentimes like maybe someone will just talk about, so say it's an employment program, a social enterprise that's employing people who have barriers to employment, is like the easy one might be, okay, well, let's look at how many people are being hired. But that's only a piece of the story. Well, how long are they being hired for? What types of jobs are they getting? What other impacts is this having on their lives? So there's lots of pieces that you can look at, but I think it's kind of figuring out what makes sense for us and also what is feasible for us, right? But it's just like general, what I would probably talk to a group about as they're kind of starting that journey is what I'm thinking of. So if anybody has an example though, that would be great from the panel.
So just to build on Brittany's great points, I think when it comes to measurement, there's a huge distinction between prove and improve. And you need to really figure out what stage you're at. Like improve is typically where you're still kind of learning what your model is going to be, you're evolving and things like that. So it's really, you're focusing on measurement to get the feedback, to get the insights, to then develop the model you want. The prove stage is what's traditionally associated with measurement, where it's like, okay, we know what our theory of change is. Here's the evidence to kind of prove it. And we've found some social entrepreneurs struggle with, because it can be so pricey and so challenging if you're kind of focusing on the prove mentality when you're really in the improve stage. So be aware of that. And then to particularly pick up on one of Brittany's points, we see lots of social entrepreneurs which do the important but easy kind of stuff, like how many people served, how many people hired, GHG emissions, things like that. What we find the really tricky part is where you go from kind of like those basic numbers to transformative change, where you're trying to show lives changed, or sure, we've reduced GHG emissions, but you know, what impact we made on climate change and stuff like that. I'd be very cautious of that, because we've also found a lot of social entrepreneurs can spend a lot of money on these kind of theoretical connections to the transformative change. And it just really doesn't kind of work out. So be very kind of careful of making sure that if you're trying to build the transformative change from just kind of like, you know, basic impact, for want of a better phrase, that it really makes sense. And it's not just these kind of very expensive kind of fictions, for want of a better phrase. So be very careful. This could be like a really, really expensive journey. And because more and more people are talking about measuring impact, there's more and more people who can make money off of helping you in your journey. So again, make sure that it's actually a kind of constructive process for you, as opposed to kind of like a rabbit hole that you're going in, very expensive rabbit hole.
I might add there, just to build on kind of what Dan shared there, Kate, is, I mean, to be kind of clear up front about what the distinctions are between output and outcomes and impact, and how you, I mean, speak differently about kind of each of those things. But I wonder if you would share with us, I mean, the nature of the work that you're looking to do, and that might help us either, I mean, offer some more offer some more thoughts, but also maybe think of some examples of organizations that you might be able to think of, like, oh, that's how they position this. This is how they're measuring that. This is the feedback they're gathering. This is where it's quantitative. This is where it's qualitative, and things like that, if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, no, totally. So the organization is called the Secret 3K. It's a run walk series that's held every year on International Women's Day. And, our goal is to be able to create safe and inclusive spaces where everyone is able to run and walk in their community. And so that's the big purpose that we're working towards. And so some of the things that we're looking to measure is how are we doing at helping people to be able to access those kinds of spaces through our run walks. How are we also, helping to build, more gender equity, with our own organization, but also, through the various folks that we interact with as we host our runs and walks. And so I think some of those pieces, I'm curious, and I mentioned the comments, Daniel, I think you made a really good point here about measuring the transformative change. Because it's easy for us to say this many people participated in our run, this many dollars were raised, this many, we actually, through the Run Walk series, all of the profits that we accrue through it go towards charities that are working with women and girls to be able to help increase access to sport and education. And so, that's where I can measure some of those pieces and say, we've been able to reach this many women and girls through, the donations that we've been able to accrue. But some of the things that I think are more challenging to be able to measure is how are we measuring, ourselves as an organization and our ability to be able to move the dial forward on some of the conversation around gender equity, on some of the pieces around how our team is building, leadership for those that are female and identify as women. How are we doing some of those kinds of things, and how can we measure those pieces better? So I think that's kind of where my question is coming from. Is I feel like the basic pieces, we are doing our best to measure that, and I feel like we're doing all right. But some of those other pieces, I think I'm wondering who's doing it well. And and to your point, Jessica, who might be a model to be able to check in against, to sort of maybe that ideal version.
I have some thoughts on what you just said, Kate. Good to see you, by the way, Kate. And I think, because this is a journey that Be Local, the network that I help steward, has also been kind of on a path of self-discovery on, in terms of what should we be reporting on as a network on behalf of our members, but also the collective impact of the network as a whole. And ultimately, who cares about those numbers? And why do they care about them, right? There's obviously the funders, they play a role in it, but then there's also potential consumers, there's potential businesses. So a piece that's been really pivotal for us is understanding who needs the numbers and why. One of the things that we're kind of discovering as part of our discovery journey is that I'm trying to lean in, and I think this is actually an area that is your specialty, Kate, is not everything can be measured with numbers. And I often find it's kind of that Western framework that's what are the numbers? And quantify. And so one of the things that we're trying to embrace more of, and we're, again, learning from some of our Indigenous partners and community members, is kind of leaning into this aspect of storytelling. And so I have no idea how the hell to measure transformational change, but I know how I can tell a story, and I know you do as well, Kate. And so, and that's what we're trying to balance out, is there's a time and a place for the metrics and the outputs and the numbers, and then there's a time and a place for some visual and some audio storytelling. And so I'm trying to create a space that, contains both and allows for opportunity for both. But it's a great question, and if you do find an answer, I'd love to hear what you come up with too, Kate.
Thanks, Phil. No, I really appreciate it. And I think you're right. Absolutely, there's a really important place in telling the story, and I think that piece is something we found really effective, especially when we're sharing that with our community, right, and with the folks that participate in our runs and walks, both here in Canada and around the world. I think though too, like as a leadership team, we're also looking for some of those metrics to also hold ourselves accountable to say, you know, how are we improving year over year? How are we doing things? And because I think it's also really easy for us to say, yeah, you know what, we raised more money, good job us, you know, and be blind to some of the ways in which we could be improving ourselves, right? And not, you know, not just sort of staying at that same sort of level, you know what I mean? And so continuing to use the metrics as a way to also help us grow.
It's funny, I think maybe, well, for me at least, the reason why I was silent at the beginning of this is I was like, oh, like who is doing this well? This just seems like such a common, you know, challenging conversation that everyone is having in the ecosystem. I can maybe just share like some of our experience. Again, not that I think it's necessarily an example of one that's going well, but a framework that we've used that I think has like helped us shift perspective on evaluation a little bit is a developmental evaluation framework. And so it's sort of a framework that sort of challenges you to ask yourself, okay, you know, like, what is the intent of measurement? Is it to be of greater service, or is it to, you know, prove the work that you're already doing, right? And so it challenges you to sort of think about developing a learning framework and asking, okay, what are the questions we need to answer in order to have the information we need to continuously improve, understanding that we're working in, you know, very complex environments. And so, yeah, like happy to share more about that experience of like using those tools. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
And Kate, just to directly answer your question, I agree. It's like very, very rare. But an organization that's I've come across that's actually starting to do this and very impressive is called Community Solutions. And it's founded by Roseanne Haggerty, who, if you haven't heard her name before, I think she's one of the great geniuses of our time. They focus on a homeless issue. And what resonates with me is not only have they kind of identified their key issues, but one of the ones that resonated with me when you were talking was they're trying to change the conversation about homelessness. So very kind of similar to what you're saying, where you're trying to change the conversation. Now, the link I'll put in the chat is where I think one of their prongs is actually measuring how they evolve the quality of the conversation about homelessness. So if the link doesn't provide that for you, and I'm getting a bit confused as to, they've done 2 quality reports. I think this is the one that mentions how they're monitoring evolving the conversation about homelessness, that I think would be kind of a great kind of insights for you as to, you know, changing conversations and how you do that. If you find that the report doesn't have information about that, because I know there's one that definitely, I couldn't believe it. It was just so thoughtful in how it's actually tracking the quality of the conversation about homelessness and whether they're influencing it. So if it's not in there and you can't find it, just reach out to Trico and I'll track down the report for you. But just her approach to tracking these issues, because Philip is absolutely right, it's just so hard to measure some of this stuff. By far the best that I've seen that have done it so far is the community solutions approach.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Kate, for the great question. Does anyone else have anything they want to kind of add to this conversation about impact measurement? Super. We had another question come through in the chat. Gurmol, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but you can please correct me. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, or would you like me to go ahead and read it out?
Yeah, I can quickly ask it, but I'm gonna have to head out soon, so I'll just ask it before I go.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, like, periods where like social entrepreneurship is the highest, like, is there like a season or a trend that's noticed? Or like, because I was wondering in the summertime, I see like less events and less networking happening, so maybe people are like traveling or going out. So I was just wondering, like, what are the periods that are like the most growth, or the one where the most funding can be obtained, like in terms of series? That's kind of what I was asking.
Thanks for the question. Philip, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Gurmal, thanks for that question. And part of the reason why this is very like front and center for me is I'm putting on an event for social entrepreneurs at the end of the month. And I was told I was an idiot by many people, including myself, that I shouldn't hold it during the summer. And, you know, I think there's a couple, like you're seeing less events, I think for two reasons. One is I think ecosystem partners are on vacation. And so, but your question was specifically about entrepreneurs. And I would argue that entrepreneurs probably don't have an off season, but their families might. So while I'm saying two things. One is that like it's the vacation rates of ecosystem partners wouldn't reflect the vacation of entrepreneurs. Secondly, though, summer's just a tough time. Like, especially if you're in Calgary, it's such a small window for good weather. A lot of the entrepreneurs that I'm working with, like they're still grinding, but because their kids are off, they're forcing themselves to take a break. And so I think there's nuance to it. But overall, like I think a lot of entrepreneurs grind all year long. It just feels like there's more activity happening during the academic school year.
I was just gonna say exactly the same thing, is that it just seems to be a general trend around everything with the summer, right? So it's not, I don't find it specific to social entrepreneurship. And I don't find it specific to like the nonprofits I work with versus the for-profit organizations I work with. I think it just has more to do with kind of like society, summer, and then also kids and families being out of school and the general time that you're taking sort of vacation to reflect that. So I know that like as someone who works in the space, we don't do a ton during the summer. Normally we wouldn't have AMAASE during the summer. So this is our first time trying it out and seeing what would happen. And it's just generally because the turnout in general between kind of like mid-June to mid-September is a lot lower when you're putting on events, is what I've found. But I don't think it's that the social entrepreneurs are stopped working. I think that it's just other priorities are happening and life is happening as well.
I'm just nodding over here to
Yeah,
Kate's comment in the
Kate's comment's great, right? It's because actually I do find that a lot of the time too, is I find a lot of our partners are like, they usually have like to plan in June for their next year, right? So they've got their board meetings and stuff like that. And then sort of July, August is like to start like executing and then looking towards that year as well.
Thanks for the question. Any other thoughts about kind of seasonality and in entrepreneurship? I know at the university we're conscientious about, I mean, of course, classes are in all through the year, but not as there's not the volume of students on campus in the summer as we would experience outside of the year, but we are, and I think we're doing a better job of this now than we were 5 or maybe 10 years ago, but we are aware that for primary caregivers of school-age children, summertime is a more complicated time for many to kind of manage schedules consistently, because their children need to be somewhere between the hours of 9 and 3 that isn't school. And so we are trying to be more conscientious about that in terms of pulling kind of our community together, or setting these expectations that we would kind of bring people together in more kind of formal ways through the summer, just recognizing that for primary caregivers, that can be a challenge when their kids are in the school. Does anyone on the panel have anything they want to share with our small, intimate group today?
I will share. You know me, any empty space will fill it with noise. Momentum is piloting a new offering this summer, and it's really tailored to the impact curious entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. And it's a little bit also in response to Kate's question indirectly, but the program's called Design Your Impact, and some of it was informed by working with Innovator. So big shout out to Meredith and her team for kind of helping us out with it. But the idea was to help people land on an idea, not the measurement piece, but to land on an idea that in theory is integrated and embedded in the core operations of a business and isn't just an add-on CSR approach. We're trying to move people away from that flavor of the month, not the like flavor of the month approach or initiative work that we sometimes can see. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I think it's a good starting point. But in this program, what we hope to unpack are kind of, these aspects of systems influences, systems levers, sustainability, and impacts on various stakeholders in the ecosystem. And so this is kind of meant to be like just a really short and sweet program, 4 days in total, but kind of if anyone is an entrepreneur, they were kind of curious about where to start, or if they had an idea and they're not sure if their idea makes sense, this could be a good program to kind of like to say at the end of it, hey, this has got some legs to it. It's a solid idea. I need to give this some further look and maybe take a program on terms of how to measure this impact that I'm going to create. In terms of registering for it, all of it is just on that link that I provided. And Pierre, I don't know what the N stands for, but yeah, there's an there's an apply button. It starts in September 12th. It's only 2.5 hours each time. First and last are online, and then first and last are in person, and then the two in between are online. So it's a hybrid offering, and again, for the impact curious.
Thank you.
And it's free.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'll introduce myself. My name is Natasha. So I am part of a nonprofit organization, but I'm looking at to do something with social enterprise. And as I was looking, I came across this, and then that's when I signed up for it. So it's really great because I don't know, there's a lot of things I'm passionate about, but I don't know how to narrow it down. So maybe attending this thing with Philip would be great.
Yeah, that's actually like that you're kind of one. When I was thinking of archetypes for this, Natasha, like some of the people I had in mind, you would very much fit I would imagine fit the person I was thinking of. But oftentimes with a lot of entrepreneurs that I run into, they know they have a business, or they know they want to run a business. Making money is part of it, but it's not all of it. And so, and they're the kind of people that like volunteer, or that they know that they can't separate their values from their business. And so in some way, shape, or form, they're going to figure out a way to have their business reflect whether it's their values or the change they want to see in the world. So my hope is that, like, for a lot of these people, how do we kind of bridge these two things, whether it's business and impact? How do we find a way to connect the two so that they're not separate? And if we are connecting the two, how do we do so in a way that is meaningful, so that it's not a distraction? And by a distraction, it's not just a drain of the business of resources, time, and energy, and takes you away from some of the things that you could be doing. And so, yeah, what does it look like to find out that thing that you probably have a personal connection to, and then how do we find a way to embed it in a way that makes the most sense? And then, to also touch on Kate's point, like also considering these other aspects, which is always like a huge point of confusion, because it really is an art form, is if we do bring in this impact, how do we communicate that work to our stakeholders in our marketing and in our branding? And again, in a way that is integrated and makes sense. Yeah, by the sounds of it, it could be a good fit for you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to chat with you about it more, Natasha.
It sounds good. Thank you.
No problem.
I'll just point out, Kate said she could ask another question if there's no one else.
Oh, sorry, Kate, I missed that in the chat. Please.
No worries. My question is, to the whole idea that sometimes summer is a little bit dead. I'd love to hear from each of you. What are your favorite meetups, your favorite events connected to social enterprise as we're heading into the fall? Like, what are you excited to be attending? Or where is the place you're like, yes, this is where our people are at. This is where I want to be, right? So I know, Phil, you already just gave us a great shout out for something that's coming up, but I'd love to hear some of the other things that are on your radar that are coming up here in the fall.
I think Phil should talk about SVI. That's the big one coming up. And we talked about SVI before the audience came in. So.
Okay, I'll quickly do it, but I think Kate was looking for other options, but I'll quickly plug SVI super quick. August 23rd to 25th, it's the only 3-day gathering for impact-minded entrepreneurs and social venture leaders from across the province. And part of the reason why I think it's a game changer is because we really try to incorporate and invite people into a completely different way of being in community, being in company with other leaders, and also in different ways of being in the spirit of innovation. And so whether it's yoga and meditation, whether it's sunsets, this year we've got a bison barbecue by the river and bannock baking on a stick. And we've got some Métis artists singing some songs. We really try to figure out what are all the special ways that we can disrupt our regular patterns of behavior and our regular cycles of thinking, and mix it up with the right amazing people in the room. And hopefully, inevitably, magic happens and besties are made. So that's SVI. But to move on past that, there was an event that was happening at Innovate earlier today. That was pretty awesome. And there was a great turnout for it. And it was hosted in partnership with the Calgary Innovation Council. And so I don't even know what the frequency of those. I think they're monthly and they rotate. But that was an awesome. And for August this morning, I think we had like 20 people in the room and probably another 10 online. So that was an awesome event. Pass it over to the rest of the group because I know other people have favorites.
Yeah, I can also just share, again, it's sort of like a monthly offering we have at the Social Innovation Hub, which is our breakfast club. We're hosting one next week on August 14th. It's really an opportunity for sort of like peer-to-peer connection, storytelling, networking. We feature an entrepreneur each time and get them to sort of tell their story, kind of in like a behind-the-scenes fashion. About their business and their startup journey. I'll just post a link to the registration in the chat. Yeah, happy to have folks attend. Always happy to like share a little bit more about the hub at those events as well. So yeah, would encourage you all to attend that. The other thing that's on my mind, we've sort of like behind the scenes in partnership with Alberta Seed and McEwen in Edmonton, been getting going on a local watch party, Alberta watch party for the Social Enterprise World Forum. And so that's not actually till the fall. I think it's October 11th to 13th. I'll post a link for that one in the chat as well. But that'll be a good sort of like unconference sort of informal opportunity to gather with other folks who are interested in social enterprise, watch some amazing global content from Social Enterprise World Forum, and then have sort of a community at your fingertips to have some facilitated discussions with. So I'll find that link. I'll post that now as well.
Where's that watch party happening, Meredith? Is it somewhere fun?
Well, we're hosting it. Is that fun?
Yeah. Is there going to be beer?
I mean, maybe on like the last night.
Cool.
I might just share that from the University of Calgary's perspective, we are planning for Social Innovation Week, which will be taking place in November. And so I'm hopeful that by our September session of Ask Me Anything, which should be on Wednesday, September 13th is my best guess about what the second Wednesday in September is at this point. Don't quote me on that. But I'm hopeful that by that date, we'll have some information to share about what kind of programming is being planned as part of that week, both on campus and off. Thank you. September 13th. Dan, Brittany, anything you want to flag from Trico or out in the community otherwise?
No, I would just say, like, with the groups that I meet with, I usually talk to them about Innovate's offerings. Been sending them SBI, and then the other one is ABC has like a peer support group for social entrepreneurs. I just don't have the link here, but I know that they've been doing sort of like almost like the support group thing. So that's another one I share with any sort of people who are getting looking to kind of make connections in this space. So those are kind of my ongoing ones that I've been sharing lately.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Any last burning thoughts? Okay, with that, well, like I said, if there's no questions, we don't keep going. So I will wrap things up. Thank everyone, our panel, and also our guests for joining us today at our August edition of Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise. As mentioned, our next session will be on September the 13th. If you attended today, you will get the link to register in your email some in the kind of coming weeks here. Also, this recording will be posted in the coming weeks as well. So if you missed anything, or if there's any resources you didn't grab from the chat, they'll be available once the link to the recording is posted. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.
Thank you.